100 years ago, when women were battling to win the vote in the United Kingdom, this place was on the front line.
Campaigners known as suffragists have been fighting for decades to secure the vote, but to no avail. So one group decided to take direct action. The Women's Social and Political Union was led by Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter Christabel. Some of the women they inspire recalled those times for a BBC documentary in 1968.
About the only things that a girl could do would be to become a nurse or a governess. I was an art student and attending South Kensington and Clapham Road Art School, and I enjoyed the art very much. But what I was really interested in was changing social conditions, and I realized that that could not be done until women had the vote.
I was very annoyed about the whole position of the difference between a boy and a girl. Everybody wanted a boy. It's a boy and all that sort of stuff. It irritated me simply enormously. And then when one grew up and saw the differences in the opportunities that boys had and that men had and those that women and girls had, well, of course, that just increased that feeling.
To publicise their cause, the women staged demonstrations, smashed windows and chained themselves to railings. The Daily Mail dubbed them the suffragettes, a term of abuse which later came to define the campaign.
If a woman went to work and her husband was out of work, he could come outside that factory, take her money as she earned it, go and spend it, and she couldn't do anything. But as soon as I was just on 30, and they said there's a suffragette round the corner speaking, so I went round the corner and I thought to myself, this woman's talking sense.
When I actually joined, I happened to meet an open-air meeting and heard the speaker say, lunatics, criminals, paupers and women may not vote. Well, I hadn't joined before then, although all my instincts had been that way, but I joined and I was in a poster parade in almost no time after that.
There was a tremendous force around us for good, and some people couldn't take it. I remember going on poster parades, so there were charming women who were in it, and they absolutely were smothered with eggs, rotten tomatoes, and you never saw anything like what we looked like at the end.
The Palace of Westminster was a place of huge symbolism for the suffragettes. They'd been denied the vote, so they were going to take their fight right into the heart of Parliament.
Initially, women would just come into Parliament, as indeed everybody was allowed to do, and they'd ask to see an MP and they'd be shown into central lobby. And then when they were sitting waiting, they'd quite often leap up onto the seats and shout votes for women and blow whistles. And this used to happen quite regularly, and it got to such a state that actually women were banned from central lobby altogether.
By 1908, their rallies were attracting huge numbers, but the Liberal government, led by Asquith, remained unmoved. So that October, the suffragettes planned to rush Parliament.
Yes, there'd been a massive demonstration, 250,000 people had gathered, and still nobody would do anything. We still didn't have any movement on the right to vote. So they decided to organise this rush on Parliament, and we think about 60,000 people were on this rush. And indeed, it's been commemorated recently. The environmental movement decided to repeat the rush, and they had a climate change rush on Parliament. So it's a historical precedent for continuing campaigns on other issues as well.
Some women did manage to break through the police lines. One even made it onto the floor of the Commons chamber. Emmeline Pankhurst was jailed for her part in inciting the rush. On her release, her colleagues awarded her this medal. It is now owned by the House of Commons and is the centrepiece of a new display by Central Lobby.
Having the exhibition in the heart of the Houses of Parliament is very important. This is the place the public can come and where we want to be able to talk to people about the importance of the right to vote, what women and others went through to get the right to vote, and to encourage them to exercise that right and to exercise it democratically. It's very, very important.
In November 1910, suffragettes would again try to rush Parliament, but were forced back by police. The violence of the day caused the women to name it Black Friday.
The Black Friday deputation was the most extraordinary thing that most of us seem to be unable to remember the treatment that we received. I myself was arrested twice on Black Friday, And I can't remember one time at all. The other time, I remember that we were smashed against a wall and we were arrested. But some people had the most ghastly treatment.
Having been banned from Central Lobby, the suffragettes had switched their attentions to the hall linking it to one of the main entrances.
In May 1909, a group of people, 2 men and 4 women, entered St Stephen's, and the men asked to see their members of Parliament and of course were allowed into Central Lobby, but the women, because they were banned from Central Lobby, waited on the seats in St Stephen's. After a few minutes, they all jumped up and they had padlocks and chains hidden about their clothing and chained themselves to 4 of the statues in St Stephen's as a protest, and started to blow whistles, and it was a protest to advertise a forthcoming suffragette rally. But of course the statue of Falkland was slightly damaged in this incident, and the spur from his boot was knocked off, and to this day you can see it's still missing from the statue.
One of the regular protesters at Parliament was Emily Wilding Davison. She hid in this broom cupboard in the Palace of Westminster on the night of the 1911 census, so when asked her address she could reply, the House of Commons. 2 years later she died when she was hit by the King's horse at the Derby while protesting. The scarf she was wearing that day is on loan to the Commons exhibition. Whether direct action proved more decisive in winning the vote than peaceful campaigning did is debatable.
I would have thought there were a whole mix of issues, and indeed the campaign for suffrage, both here and in other countries like in the States, was also connected with the campaign for working rights for women. So you have a whole range of different things going on, but undoubtedly the militant action also played its part, and I have to say, I don't know whether I would have been as brave as they were in some of the actions that they took. It's hard to put yourself back in that position, but I wonder what would I have done. I hope I'd have at least been on the demonstration, whether I'd have chained myself to the railings, thrown stones, been under a hunger strike and been force-fed in prison. I'm not quite sure.
Public pressure grew as suffragettes in prison were force-fed to prevent them from hunger striking, a hugely unpopular policy. But the turning point would be the First World War. As women took up the jobs men left behind, their war effort was recognised with the Representation of the People Act. In 1918, women over 30 were given the right to vote. Women finally got the right to vote at the same age as men in 1928.
As far as there was 50 years of careful negotiation to try and get a vote, 9 years of militancy, done as much good as what the 50 previous years did. But at the finish, it was the 1914 war, and all the agitation from it that brought the vote, in my opinion.
Emmeline Pankhurst died a month before the 1928 Act became law. This statue to her was unveiled 2 years later. It stands in Victoria Gardens, close to the Parliament she'd fought so hard to influence.